Welcome to this explainer. Honestly, I'm absolutely thrilled to have you here today because we're going on a pretty fascinating journey. We're going to start way down at the micro level, deep inside individual human psychology, and then scale all the way up to the macro level of total organizational success. We're unpacking the invisible forces that drive exactly how we behave at work.
So, have you ever wondered why some employees will literally bend over backwards to help their companies thrive, while others, well, they just quietly let things fall apart? Or worse, actively push them toward failure? It's a deeply relatable puzzle, isn't it? Well, the answer doesn't actually lie in how smart they are, what their skill set is, or even what their salary looks like. The real answer lies in one of the most influential psychological concepts in management: attitude. Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for our micro to macro journey through the organizational mind today. We'll start with the psychology of attitude, look at attitudes in the workplace, explore when things go wrong, examine the power of engagement, and then wrap up with modern employee engagement trends.
Number 1. The psychology of attitude. Inside the employee's mind. We're starting deep inside the individual human brain.
First things first, let's clearly define what we're talking about here. An attitude is essentially an evaluative statement. It reflects exactly how a person feels, thinks, or behaves towards something. But notice the core difference between attitude and personality here. Personality, that's relatively stable. It's kind of set in stone. Attitudes, however, are a lot more like clay. They are wonderfully malleable. They can change entirely based on new information, new experiences, or just shifting to a totally different work environment. And that flexibility is exactly why managers need to pay such close attention to them.
To really break down how attitudes work, we rely on the ABC model of attitude. Let's start with the A, the affective component. This is all about the heart. It's a person's emotions or feelings towards something. Think about an employee who genuinely loves working in a collaborative team simply because it makes them feel valued and respected. Those positive emotions form the critical baseline for how they approach their entire workday.
Now, those feelings, they naturally build into the B, the behavioral component. This is how a person intends to act or how they actually behave in real life, based on their attitude. Because our employee feels valued in their team, they translate those feelings into real-world actions. They're much more likely to volunteer for extra responsibilities, support a struggling colleague, and contribute far beyond their basic job description.
And finally, we have the C, the cognitive component. Think of this as the mental framing taking place inside the brain. It's a person's underlying beliefs, knowledge, opinions, or perceptions. For instance, if an individual believes that their company provides excellent career growth opportunities, that concrete belief serves as the cognitive foundation of their entire attitude toward the organization.
So, how do these three pieces actually interact? Well, it's a continuous loop. Step 1, your belief, the cognitive part, directly leads to Step 2, your feeling, the affective part. And that triggers Step 3, your action, the behavioral part. These components are firing and triggering one another simultaneously. What you believe influences how you feel, which ultimately shapes how you behave. If you firmly believe your organization values employee development, you feel motivated, and as a direct result, you actively participate in training and crush your performance goals. It's a seamless, continuous loop.
But let's pause for a second and consider a much darker scenario. What happens when your actions are forced to betray your beliefs? Imagine you strongly believe in maintaining absolute honesty and ethical standards. That's your cognitive baseline, right? But then, your manager directly instructs you to provide misleading information to an important client. Suddenly, bam, there's a massive collision between your personal values and your workplace expectations.
That intense psychological discomfort, it's honestly like a mental splinter in your brain, is called cognitive dissonance. It happens whenever there's a glaring inconsistency between your beliefs, your attitudes, and your behavior. And as human beings, we are hardwired to hate this discomfort. We will desperately try to restore balance, either by changing our behavior, changing our beliefs, or trying to somehow mentally justify the inconsistency. If a workplace leaves cognitive dissonance unresolved, it will absolutely tank employee motivation, destroy job satisfaction, and severely compromise ethical decision-making.
Moving on to Part 2, attitudes in the workplace. Zooming out to the desk level. We're stepping out of the individual brain and looking at everyday office life. Down at the desk level, there are 3 vital attitudes that essentially dictate everyday performance. First up is job satisfaction. Basically, are you happy with the day-to-day balance and the pay? Second is job involvement. Do you psychologically tie your self-worth to your actual work output? And third, which is huge, is organizational commitment. Are you fiercely emotionally loyal to the company's mission? When managers can lock down high levels on these 3, absenteeism plummets and retention completely soars.
Which brings us to part 3, when things go wrong, dealing with dissatisfaction. Because look, even with the best practices, dissatisfaction happens.
And this brilliantly illustrates the 4 common ways employees express that dissatisfaction. It's a simple grid of active versus passive and constructive versus destructive. If an employee's response is active and destructive, they choose exit. They're out. They resign. If the response is passive and destructive, they choose neglect. This is exactly where that modern trend of quiet quitting comes in. They just let their performance slip. If they're passive but constructive, they show loyalty, quietly sticking around just hoping things magically improve. But the absolute ideal response? That's voice, which is active and constructive. This is when employees actively communicate their concerns and suggest real improvements. Voice is by far the most constructive response because it aims to actually collaborate with management and solve the underlying problems.
Part 4. The power of engagement. The macro view. Let's zoom out once more to the organizational scale.
We need to draw a really hard line here between 2 commonly confused concepts. Job satisfaction is simply feeling positively about your job. You can be highly satisfied while doing the absolute bare minimum required of you. But employee engagement, that's a totally different ballgame. Engagement is an emotional commitment and a willingness to consistently give extra effort to achieve the company's goals. It goes way, way beyond mere satisfaction. Truly engaged employees are the ones taking initiative, driving innovation, and consistently performing at the absolute highest possible levels.
But you can't just guess engagement. You really have to measure it. Organizations track hard data to capture these invisible attitudes. They deploy engagement surveys, monitor turnover rates, look at absenteeism, and evaluate the Employee Net Promoter Score, or ENPS. That measures how likely an employee is to actually recommend the organization to a friend. High scores on these metrics aren't just vanity numbers. They undeniably link to customer satisfaction, innovation, and long-term business profitability.
And finally, Part 5, Modern Employee Engagement Trends. The workplace is changing rapidly, and companies have to keep up.
Today's workforce is pushing organizations to evolve in 3 really major ways. First off, there's a massive emphasis on work-life balance and hybrid models. Younger professionals, especially, are demanding flexibility and personal well-being right alongside their career growth. Second is the rise of digital HR technologies. We're talking cloud-based systems, AI-powered recruitment, digital performance tools that make the daily experience super smooth. But the third trend? It is absolutely the most vital. Empathetic leadership. Employees today don't just want a boss, they expect leaders who genuinely care. They want managers who listen, who try to understand personal challenges, and who prioritize well-being. Organizations that demonstrate real empathy are the ones experiencing the absolute strongest loyalty and the highest levels of engagement.
So I want to leave you with a thought to really chew on. Based on everything we've uncovered in this explainer, from the ABCs of attitude inside the brain, to the dangers of cognitive dissonance, all the way up to those macro-level metrics, take a close look at your own organization. Does your workplace culture foster mere satisfaction or true driven engagement? Thank you so much for learning with me today. I really hope this gives you a whole new lens to view your workday through.